Hey everyone, welcome into the first episode of the Average Fantasy Football Podcast. I'm your host, Thomas Garbrick, and alongside me, I have two analysts, friends, whatever I want to call you guys. We'll make it work, who cares? We got Bob Curran with us, and then Jacob Fleck. Joe Schnug will also be another contributor on this podcast. This podcast is sponsored by Two Cups. Make sure you go over to their website as Bob's moving over. For memorabilia, t-shirts, all that fun stuff. You can follow them on Twitter, Instagram, all that fun stuff, SoundCloud as well. Before we dive in, since this is episode 1, let's talk about why we decided to do this. So I'll give a brief intro of who I am. I just graduated from Ohio University. You see the flag in the background. We're all proud OU alumni, correct? Okay.
Yeah.
So I am in the TV business right now. I am a news anchor and reporter in Decatur, Illinois at WAND TV. So my passion is sports, but I've found a liking for doing news. So I've loved fantasy football my whole life. I started playing when I was probably 7 or 8 years old, and here we are now. It's a chance for us to talk about fantasy football on a weekly basis, give people some average advice, and have fun with it.
Yeah, I graduated from OU in 2019. I've been playing fantasy football since I was about 10 years old. Started off in my dad's work league when they needed an extra dude. And I've had a passion for it ever since. I'm a 3-time champion in any format, standard, half point, or full point PPR. So, I got more dubs than Andy Reid does in the Super Bowl. So, and I'm a huge Chicago Bears sports fan, if you haven't been able to tell from the Andy Reid Hawaiian shirt and the hat. But I just wanted something to do during COVID, and this sounded like the best thing to do.
Yeah, so Jacob, I just graduated from OU as well. With Tommy, we were actually roommates there for a while. We've been talking about doing this for a long time, couple years at least, if not more. And so I'm glad to see that we're finally doing it. I feel like I might not have the best advice to give sometimes, but I do have some sleeper picks and some things along those lines that pay off in the long run. So still a little salty about last year's league when scored the most points in the league by like 200 and somehow ended up losing, but we'll talk about that at a later time.
Right. For all the newbies who join and play fantasy football, there are going to be weeks where you just want to pull your hair out because of things like that. Sometimes that's just the luck of the draw, but that's what makes fantasy football so awesome. So obviously, guys, we're in a couple leagues together. We've already had a draft in one league. We're going to have another draft here coming up in September. We're starting to get into the heart of fantasy football drafts here at the end of July. Teams are getting ready to report for training camp. We've learned that there will be no preseason games, so that will be interesting. But I just want to start with you guys. I'll start with Bob. Just tips and tricks for maybe new fantasy football comers who haven't really drafted before, who are new to the scene. What kind of advice would you give leading into fantasy football drafts?
Yeah, so I'm going to break mine down based on 2 categories, and that's the standard versus half point or full point PPR leagues. So if you're in a standard league, you're not going to get any kind of point per reception for any kind of player. So for those leagues, I am dead set on drafting as many good running backs as I possibly can for my team. They're always going to get carries late in the game. If the team has a lead, they're going to get garbage time, just run the clock out yardage. Not to mention, a lot of teams nowadays love to run the football. If you look at trends last year with like the Baltimore Ravens, the San Francisco 49ers, as well as the Green Bay Packers, they run the crap out of the ball. And so if you can, first 3 rounds, get 3 stud running backs and then focus on some wide receivers on pass-heavy teams, you'll still find that you'll have a very solid core group of players. And then so for either a half point or full point PPR league, I still suggest drafting a good running back in the first round if you can, unless you have like a Michael Thomas, Devontae Adams, or DeAndre Hopkins option available. After that first round, I am all about best player available. That doesn't always just mean the number 1 person next on the draft board, but the number 1 player that you need for your team. So if you draft a good running back in the first round, that second round, if there's a stud wide receiver there or a running back that is a good pass catch option, snag them up right away.
Fleck, advice from you.
Yeah, so I just have like 3 main points for new people to fantasy. First one, I kind of agree with Bob, but whether you're in a PPR league or a standard league, a good running back cannot hurt you, especially one that's versatile, can catch the ball as well as run for good yardage. That's something that's going to benefit your team no matter what league you're in. Another thing is, there's plenty of good and consistent quarterbacks in the league. There's 32 teams. Okay. Normally in a league, you have 10, maybe 12 teams in your fantasy league. So don't pull the trigger too early on a great quarterback. Yes, there are some great quarterbacks that you may want on your team, but also, wait a while, let the rounds tick by a little bit, and then pick up one that's going to be consistent for you week in and week out. And then lastly, I'm a big tight end guy. I like having a good, solid tight end that I could rely on week in and week out. I'm not afraid to pull that trigger, in the third round, and get a good tight end right off the bat, because I think sometimes, those can be the deciding factors in a game. If your tight end puts up 20 points consistently, that right there is going to help you out a long way. So those are kind of my three main points for anybody that would be getting into fantasy.
Yeah, I agree with you both big time. I think we all know that running back is king in fantasy football, even though in real football it comes down to quarterback play. But in fantasy football, it's like you guys said, you really got to hammer the running back position, because there are only so many good, reliable starting running backs. So don't be afraid to draft 2, 3, 4 in the first 5, 6 rounds if you have to. I think another big thing, Fleck, you mentioned quarterback. Quarterback is very deep. It's a very rich class. It seems like it's getting deeper every year. I will say, as Bob mentioned, make sure you know what league you're in. I know some leagues, I know I just did a draft for a 2-quarterback league, and so that does change the value of a quarterback. And so you have to kind of evaluate some of the quarterbacks in terms of when do I feel like it would be an appropriate time to start taking some of those quarterbacks. So yeah, my biggest advice for people is just know the league, know the people in your league as the best as you can. Obviously, Bob being a Bears fan, Fleck and I are both Browns fans. You can kind of capitalize on people, because people do tend to draft players from their favorite teams. So know your draft. Another big thing I would say is don't feel like you have to pick a position, like Bob mentioned, just because you need one. Take the best player available. I think a lot of people get in the habit of, if there's a run on tight ends, everyone's like, oh, I got to scoop up a tight end, or same thing with a quarterback. Stick with your board. Take the best player available. Don't follow the trend, because at the end of the day, if you do that, your team is going to be middle of the road, because your team's just falling draft board. So I think those are my biggest things, is really, really know who you're drafting with, know what kind of draft you're in, and running backs are king. You cannot get too many. So I want to start with kind of a fun thing that a lot of people do is a sleeper for this upcoming season. Somebody who you feel like is being underdrafted, someone you feel like could really catapult themselves as an elite player this year, someone who will outperform their ADP. We'll start with the sleeper. We'll do the same thing with a bust pick, maybe somebody who's a little too rich for their ADP. So I'll start with Bob. Sleeper for this year.
Yeah, so I actually have two. My first one is going to definitely play towards my Chicago Bears bias. But I definitely suggest, if he's there in the 9th, 10th, or 11th round and you need a 3rd or 4th receiver, grab Anthony Miller. He is definitely right away going to be the Chicago Bears wide receiver 2, second to Allen Robinson, who will be a first 3-round draft pick in most leagues. Anthony Miller last year, the last 5 games of the season, averaged 12 PPR fantasy points with 2 games with at least 23. And so when that first read's not there for Mitch and he can actually make the second one, Anthony Miller's the guy. He likes to play out of the slot a lot, and they like to run a lot of screen passes with him, and he can open that up and really get some nice scores out of that. My second one is, if they are the starter, I think that Tyrod Taylor could be a steal as a late-round quarterback option. I wouldn't draft him to be a QB1, but with the weapons he has around him, you look at Keenan Allen, Mike Williams, Hunter Henry, Austin Eckler, one of the best receiving backs in the league, and a bolstered offensive line through free agency. I really think that Tyrod could end up being a top 15 quarterback in fantasy football by the end of the season.
I like that a lot. Fleck. Who's your big sleeper for this upcoming season?
So I got two as well. I'm going with Ty as my number one, my vet sleeper. Ty's been pretty consistent always, but now that they got a new quarterback in town, and I think he's going to get a lot more targets this year and a lot more touchdowns as well. So I think he's going to be a great sleeper as far as value goes. Another sleeper that I have is Daniel Jones. I decided to pull the trigger on him, draft him kind of late. And I really do think, with what the Giants are doing, I think he's going to be able to be of high production in that offense. And I think he's going to be a great top 15 quarterback.
Absolutely. I like both those picks. For me, I wouldn't say this is so much of a sleeper, but I do think this guy is going to outperform his ADP. He's currently going in ESPN drafts. He's going late second round, early third, and that's Josh Jacobs of the Oakland Raiders. I think he is going to take a magnificent leap this upcoming season, his second year. We've seen guys take that leap after their rookie season as a running back. We saw it last year with Nick Chubb. He had such a dominant season with the Cleveland Browns. I think Josh Jacobs is ready to emerge as an elite running back one with the Las Vegas Raiders. I think when you look at the pieces there, Leon Washington's gone. Jalen Richard does return, but looking at what Mike Mayock has said and head coach John Gruden has said, they want to get him the ball more in pass catching situations. So I think Josh Jacobs, and plus, keep in mind, guys, he wasn't fully healthy down the stretch last year. He was battling that shoulder injury. I really do like Josh Jacobs to emerge as an elite fantasy football running back. And my hot take is that he's going to finish this year as a top 5 fantasy football running back. I think he is a discount in the late second round. My other deep sleeper is Hayden Hurst for the Atlanta Falcons. He's kind of a trendy pick as a tight end. Traded this offseason from the Baltimore Ravens to the Atlanta Falcons. Obviously, Austin Hooper is now a Cleveland Brown. The Browns paid that man a large amount of money to become the new tight end there. So we can debate contracts and all that good stuff later, but there is a huge opportunity for Hayden Hurst to become the guy there in Atlanta. Obviously, Matt Ryan has always loved throwing it to the tight end. He started his career with Tony Gonzalez. Austin Hooper emerged as a very good fantasy football option. You've got Julio, you've got Calvin Ridley. I think Hayden Hurst is going to fit in there nicely. I like his chances around the goal line to catch touchdowns. So those are my two big sleepers for this upcoming season. I believe I have Jacobs and Hurst in both of the teams I've drafted so far, but I want to hear maybe somebody who is going a lot higher for you guys in drafts that you feel like is not going to perform their ADP, might be a complete bust. Bob, I'll start with you. Anybody that comes to mind that you feel like is not worth that draft day price tag?
Yeah, I know, especially for people who really like quarterbacks and fantasy football this year, at least to start out, do not draft this player in the first 8 rounds of your draft, and that is Aaron Rodgers. And let me tell you why. They added 0 weapons to that offense this offseason. They have Devontae Adams, some guy named Lazard, who's a nobody, and they picked up Devin Funchess for $2 million coming off a season-ending collarbone injury. They still have Aaron Jones, who's a great running back. I have him in a fantasy league. It's a dynasty league. But that's because Rodgers last season checked the ball down more than any other quarterback in the league. And if you're not going to give him anybody to take the top off like he used to have, and Randall Cobb, Jordy Nelson, Greg Jennings, he doesn't like to really throw intermediate routes. And so unless you already have a decent QB1 or you're looking to get that solid late round addition, I would hold off on drafting Rodgers until at least the 8th round.
Okay, Fleck, thought for someone who's a little too rich for your blood on draft day.
Yeah, so, I thought about that for a while here. And I haven't really come to the conclusion yet of, who I want to say is going to be a little too rich for what they're worth. I'm going to make that prediction a little closer to the season. I want to see, how this first part of getting into the season goes, and I'll make that call at a later date.
Okay, I respect it. For me, I think the guy that I think is just not going to perform where he's getting drafted is Kenyon Drake. He's going in the 2nd round of drafts. I understand he was awesome down the stretch. He had that one great game against the Browns. He scored 3 rushing touchdowns, ran for over 100 yards. But I just personally think, I get it. He's the starter there in Arizona. I like him as a solid RB2 option. But for me, he's going ahead of guys like Nick Chubb, Austin Eckler, Miles Sanders, guys with more upside, in my opinion, and less risk. I know that some people will say, well, Miles Sanders, Philly never commits to a running back. Everything that I've read this offseason tells me that Miles Sanders is going to be the featured back there. He's going to get more touches. I just don't like Kenyon Drake going in the second round. Some guys are drafting him as their RB1 because they're taking a guy like a Michael Thomas or a Chris Godwin or a Devontae Adams or a Tyreek Hill in the first round, or even DeAndre Hopkins, and then pairing them with a Kenyon Drake. I don't like relying on Drake as an RB1. I simply will not take him in any drafts because a second round grade for me is just simply too high.
I completely agree. Especially with second year coming in for Cliff Kingsbury over there in Arizona, adding DeAndre Hopkins and keeping, Fitzmagic and Larry Fitzgerald. I don't see them trying to run the ball more than 20 times a game, and probably at least 5 of those are going to be designed runs with Kyler Murray. And
Right.
So unless they use him as a viable passing back, I definitely do not like that second round grade either.
Absolutely.
Well, I
Go ahead, Floyd.
I think he's going to be a little higher up than you guys are projecting him to be. I think Drake is versatile, and I do believe that he'll be used as a passing back in this upcoming season on that offense. Adding DeAndre Hopkins is a phenomenal pickup, and I still can't believe he went for what he did. But I think they're going to utilize him a lot more than you guys are projecting. But hey, we'll see.
So, Fleck, do you want to make a 2 cups bet here about where Kenyon Drake's going to finish then for the upcoming year? Where do you think he's going to finish? Do you think he's going to finish as a top 10 running back in fantasy?
I'm going to say top 15.
Top 15. Well, I'm more against that. So I will say that Kenyon Drake will not finish as a top 15 fantasy football running back. Well, let's go based off his ADP. Right now, his ADP, he's being drafted as RB. He's in the range of like RB 8 to 12. Do you think he would be? How about this? Do you think he will finish as a top 11 fantasy football running back this year?
I was comfortable with the 15.
Well, you got to bet on him at 11. You got to bet on him.
Let's bet on him 12.
Bet on him at 12? Okay,
12.
So I think that Kenyon Drake is going to finish outside of the top 12 in fantasy football this year. You think he's going to finish in the top 12. We're going to do these 2 cups bets throughout the season with stuff like this. It'll be fun. It's something that I know that ESPN really does really well. I really enjoy their board bets, so we're going to do our own version there. So put it on the board, as they say. But now I kind of want to, we looked at guys that are individuals who are going to be either could make or break your fantasy team. But I want to now kind of look at maybe teams who had a bad 2019 season, who are going to bounce back fantasy-wise, that maybe some owners should target, and also talk about teams that fantasy owners should avoid in 2020. I'll start with Bob again. Who's a team that you feel like is going to have a good fantasy bounce-back season that someone could target multiple players on one team?
Yeah, it's something I really thought a lot about. I know there's a lot of hype about like the Denver Broncos right now, but I'm not too high on Drew Lock going into year 2, only having 5 real games under his belt. But it pains me to say this because they are an NFC North rival, but I'm going with the Detroit Lions. If Matthew Stafford can stay healthy for 16 or 17 games, now I think that the Lions will be a very, very good offensive team. They're going to bring Kenny Golladay back, who is a wide receiver that is insane in fantasy football, top 10, I think last year, and definitely projected to be a top 10 receiver again this year in fantasy. Double that with Marvin Jones, who was on pace last year when Matthew Stafford was quarterback to have over 1,000 receiving yards and 12 touchdowns on 85 receptions. And so if that's a PPR league, that's a really nice wide receiver too to have. Not to mention they're going to bring back their big tight end in Hawkinson, who is a giant red zone target for Stafford. And they just brought in DeAndre Swift at running back to kind of challenge Kerryon Johnson and complement that running game they have there. So I definitely think the Detroit Lions could be an offensive powerhouse, especially if they start the season on offense like they did last year in those first about 5 or 6 games that Stafford was healthy.
I agree. I really do like DeAndre Swift. I don't like DeAndre Swift for Kerryon Johnson's purposes, but as a fantasy whole and for Matthew Stafford and for some of those receivers, especially Kenny Golladay, I do agree with you, Bob. I think they're going to be a team who's going to be able to put up some points, and we'll have a lot of guys that you can start in your lineup weekly. Fleck, what about you? Is there a team that you think is ready to bounce back this upcoming year?
Yeah, so obviously, being a huge Browns fan, I'm going to go with the Browns. Nothing pains me more to say it, but I'm going to say it anyways because year in and year out, we look great on paper. We really do. Every year, we look pretty good on paper. And I think this year, Baker's had some time to mature. He's had some time to get ready, get his body ready, get mentally ready, the biggest thing there. And obviously with the targets that he has, Odell and Jarvis, and the backfield help that he has with Hunt and Chubb. I'm ready to see what this new coach has got for us offensively, and I really do think that the Browns are going to have a very explosive offensive year.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, I know that a lot of Browns fans are certainly happy with the change. They felt that Freddie Kitchens was going to be the solution last year, and clearly he was not. It was a very, very rough 2019 season for the Cleveland Browns, for Cleveland Browns fans. And I think, Fleck, like you said, Kevin Stefanski, he had a lot of success as the associate head coach in Minnesota. You saw what they were able to do with the play action game with Kirk Cousins and Adam Thielen and Stephon Diggs, and seeing Dalvin Cook break out last year. I think even though Kareem Hunt's still around, I think there's going to be enough work for him and Nick Chubb to both flourish in fantasy. And I agree with you. I am all in on Odell this year. And, it's funny. Last year he still had 74 receptions, over 1,000 yards. He just only had 4 touchdowns. I think he's going to get double-digit touchdowns this year. Freddie Kitchens, for some reason last year, did not want to take deep shots with Baker. I think that's going to change. They get that play-action game going, they are going to be a dangerous team. But for me, because the Browns were going to be one of my 2 teams. The other team, and Bob will love this, is his Chicago Bears. I am a big Nick Foles fan. I'm a big believer, obviously, what he was able to do with the Eagles and win them a Super Bowl, stepping in for Carson Wentz. I am a Nick Foles believer. Obviously, his tenure in Jacksonville didn't work out. He got injured, and then Gardner Minshew came in, and ultimately the Jaguars decided to go with Minshew, shed Nick Foles' contract to the Bears. Did the Bears give up a little too much for that? Was that a great deal? Maybe not, but you know what? They got Nick Foles. I think Nick Foles is going to end up winning the quarterback job, and I think that's only going to help Allen Robinson, who I think is also being a bit underdrafted. I think he was the number 7 fantasy football receiver in PPR formats last year. I think with Foles, he could easily finish in the top 5. And like Bob said, I think Anthony Miller can take another step forward as long as he can stay healthy. But I really, really like David Montgomery. I was in on him last year. He unfortunately was not as good last year, but I do think he's going to run for over 1,000 yards. I think he's going to be a solid RB2. I think there are going to be a lot of players in that offense that are going to be playable on a weekly basis. And even Nick Foles, if you're in a 2-quarterback league and you don't want to reach for a quarterback, I do like Nick Foles as a QB2. Is he a strong QB2 right now? Maybe not so, but I think by the time we're talking about the Bears, maybe a month into the season or 6-7 games in, I think Nick Foles is going to be in the QB2 conversation for sure.
Yeah.
Bob, no thoughts on the Bears? Come on, nothing on the
So I think Trubisky's gonna definitely, with no preseason now, he's the week 1 starter. And unfortunately,
Really?
We're playing the Lions week 1, and I say unfortunately because Mitch Trubisky weirdly owns the Detroit Lions, averages almost 300 passing yards and 3 touchdowns against that team up north, from us in Ohio. And so I don't know. I think Nick Foles, once he gets the job, I think the offense will take that next step. I think Nagy's going to play a little bit more, big personnel. We have 10 tight ends currently on our roster. Hopefully that gets dwindled back a little bit. But I do like the addition of Cole Kmet and Jimmy Graham to help get those outside blocks for Montgomery to actually get some runs going and to actually maybe use Tariq Cohen as more of a gadget player and Montgomery as our RB1. So I definitely think there is a lot of upside once Foles gets that starting job.
Absolutely. Another team I just want to touch on real quickly, for obvious reasons, the Tampa Bay Buccaneers. You add Tom Brady, you add Gronk, I know, but you guys are rolling your eyes like, come on, Thomas, this is obvious. But again, I think Chris Godwin, he was number 2 in fantasy last year. I think he has a chance to sustain that again this year. Mike Evans should catapult into the top 10. I do like Gronk as a late TE1. I know some people are reaching for him. If you can get him in those late middle rounds, I like Gronk. OJ Howard is still a Buccaneer. I think OJ Howard could be worth something, especially if Gronk goes down. Gronk has a history of getting hurt. OJ Howard could step in and be something. And I do like the two running backs that they got. I know Ronald Jones has struggled, but everything that I've seen this offseason is that Ronald Jones is ready to have a big year 3. He's struggled his first couple of years, especially in pass protection. But I think him and Keyshawn Vaughn are going to be interesting in that backfield. Get as many Tampa Bay Buccaneers as you can, is what I'm saying.
Yeah, Tommy, I agree with you on the Gronk situation there. You know, this isn't the Gronk that we've seen in years past. This is the new Gronk, a little older, had some time off to heal though. So it'll be interesting to see, you know, how he bounces back and what kind of production value he adds. Also, what you said with Godwin, that was number 2 in fantasy with Jameis Winston as a quarterback, not Tom Brady as a quarterback. Right. So to see someone with his reputation step in to that QB1 role, it'll be awesome to see what kind of value that gives him as far as fantasy points goes. So
absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think Chris Godwin will assume the Julian Edelman kind of role that made him so profitable in that New England Patriots offense. So obviously we've touched on the teams who we think are going to bounce back, or teams that fantasy owners should go after. But I want to hear from you guys, who are teams that maybe fantasy owners should avoid this upcoming season, who might take a step back or maybe are overhyped? Bob, I'll start with you.
So this one probably won't be a popular opinion for most people, but I think you both will like it, being Browns fans. But I'm very hesitant to draft any Pittsburgh Steeler this coming fantasy football season, especially if you look at the 2 previous years of the franchise. Big Ben is up there, one of the oldest quarterbacks in the league. He has slimmed down, but you know that walking boot's going to come out at some point in the season, and their offense is going to completely halt if he is never in there. Big Ben's guaranteed to miss at least 1 or 2 games in the season. I don't believe that James Conner is going to keep up that production he had in Le'Veon Bell's year off. I think that teams are going to just try to double Juju and say, who else do you got? And I don't really know if there's anybody else. You know, Big Ben is a good quarterback, but he's not mobile. And in that division, playing against the defensive lines of the Browns and the Ravens twice a year, he's going to get hammered. And so I'm definitely hesitant to get any kind of Pittsburgh Steeler. I mean, if Big Ben's still there in the round like 14, 15, and you need a quarterback, grab Big Ben. Historically, he's been good in fantasy. I don't believe Juju Smith-Schuster is a first 2-round draft pick. Unless you're in a full-point PPR format, I'm hesitant to draft any Pittsburgh Steeler outside of the first 3 rounds.
Okay. I know a lot of people have said that Deontay Johnson has been a trendy sleeper pick. I think obviously the Steelers are going to be better because with Big Ben, obviously they will be better. But yeah, there's a lot of questions in that backfield. I know that there have been talks that James Conner might not come back after next year. I know that obviously his story there is great in Pittsburgh, and he had the good run a couple years back. So it'll be interesting to see how the Steelers shape out this season. Fleck, do you have a team that you think that will take a step back, or a team that fantasy owners should be very hesitant and cautious about?
You know, my team that I think that fantasy owners should be a little hesitant about is the Washington Redskins, and that's just for obvious reasons. With everything going on right now.
Redskins, now just Washington.
Yeah, I guess. Yeah, Washington D.C.'s team. So you know, I think that, you know, with everything going on right now inside their organization, and it's just not good, obviously. And the thing with that is, you know, football teams who have a history of being very, very good and consistently good, it starts with their organization and the culture they have with that organization. So when you have a toxic culture such as Washington's, it has that trickle down effect. Now, Ron Rivera is a very well-known and respected coach in the league. So I think he'll have his players game ready, but I don't think they're going to be that good at all this season, and I would be wary of them.
I agree. I think it's going to be one of those seasons that it's going to be tough for them. Granted, it probably does help that there's not going to be any fans, so they're not going to really have to face the fan base. But yeah, it's going to be a very difficult situation for them to kind of navigate through everything that's been going on with them. For me, I know Bob touched on it earlier, but for me, it's the Denver Broncos. I'm with Bob. I'm not buying the hype in this team. I don't believe in Drew Lock. I think he's a very average quarterback at best. I like Courtland Sutton, but I'm seeing Courtland Sutton being drafted as high as in the 3rd round over guys like Adam Thielen. I've seen him go higher than like Juju Smith-Schuster. I get that Juju had a bad year, but Juju is extremely talented and Big Ben is back. I just don't like the Denver Broncos. I like Jerry Jeudy, but I was very mad to see him go to Denver. It's not the best situation. I like KJ Hamler out of Penn State. He's a very fast guy, but there's a lot of mouths to feed all of a sudden. You've got those 3 receivers on top of Noah Fant, who's a trendy sleeper pick. And then you add Melvin Gordon into the running back mix with Philip Lindsay. For me, it's going to be tough to find a guy who's going to explode week to week. I think Melvin Gordon is obviously the lead back without a doubt, but Philip Lindsay has proven himself to be solid. I think it's going to be challenged to figure out how to work those two in together. But to me, when I look at the Denver Broncos, I think there's just a lot of risk for them and not a whole lot of reward.
I agree. I do. I love Vic Fangio out there. He led one of the best defenses I've ever watched live in that 2018 Bears team, but he's not an offensive guy. They did bring in, I think, a new O coordinator this past season, but until Drew Lock can go out there and consistently get a whole season under his belt, I'm hesitant to buy into anybody but Melvin Gordon on that offense.
Well, boys, before we sign off from episode 1, any last thoughts about just the first episode and excited that fantasy is almost back, hopefully. Fingers crossed that nothing happens and we have professional football.
Yeah, I'm excited we did it. I think if I have one thing to leave for all the people watching this first episode, if you get the number 1 pick in your draft and do not select Christian McCaffrey, you are very stupid. Last year, he averaged 22.2 points per game, and that is without Cam Newton. They brought in Teddy Bridgewater, who is a consistent quarterback. He's not going to turn the ball over. We saw what he did with the Saints last year. I definitely think Christian McCaffrey at the 1 spot will live up to expectations, barring any catastrophic injury.
Absolutely. Fleck?
Yeah, I'm happy that we're finally doing this. Like I said before, we've been talking about doing this for a while, and I think that all of us have some great opinions on, what makes a good fantasy football team, and it's shown through our teams. So I'm excited to see what this season holds. No preseason is going to be a little weird, but it'll be interesting to see how everything plays out.
Absolutely. I think for us, it's a good time to be able to chat about something that we're all passionate about and do something on the side like this. So for all of you out there, just expect that we'll do this once a week. We'll do different things each week. End of the season, we'll break down the previous week. Guys stock who's up, good guys to trade for, someone that you should probably try and trade away, look at the matchups, talk about who's playing the best right now. And this is something that we're going to try and do weekly leading up to the season as well. So maybe next week we plan on doing some sort of mock draft for 3 or 4 rounds, just so that way people can see what's going on. But we're going to be taking a close look at teams as we get more news, as teams get ready to head to training camp. So it'll be a lot of fun to do this on a weekly basis, and we'll check in on our fantasy teams and all of our 2 cups bets that we end up making this year. So it'll be a lot of fun. But for me, just the big thing is that we are sponsored by 2 Cups. So big shout out to our friend Griffin Hart and also OU Bobcat. 2 Cups originated in Athens, Ohio. So if you haven't had a chance, make sure again you go follow him in 2 Cups on Instagram and Twitter, and then this podcast will be posted on their Instagram slot as well as their SoundCloud. So for Thomas Garverick with Bob Kerwin, Jacob Fleck, and next time, hopefully, Joe Schnug.